So product-led sales is the approach to kind of connect the best from both worlds together. So we have sales-led on the one hand, where a salesperson is trying to show you the product and then you pay a lot of money. And then we have product-led growth, where you don't have a salesperson normally involved because, like the individual price per person is just not worth it. And together, this gives you product-led sales. And the only difference, in a sense, is that we try to measure in product-led sales what a business customer is showing us that they do with the product to determine whether they are ready to buy or not. So instead of having 100 business customers getting into cars and driving around, what we make sure is that we measure very exact who is getting into the car. We still let you test drive, right? So we have a lot of B2B customers, but out of these hundreds, there's maybe 10 who are exhibiting a very different behavior. We attach their behavior to what's happening, and then from there, we kind of attach scores. And if you go above a specific threshold, then you are a good target to reach out and also to close.
Ciao, io sono Marco Imparato e questo è il podcast di Product Heroes. Product Heroes è il punto di riferimento in Italia per il product management. Finora abbiamo aiutato oltre 180.000 persone tramite master, formazione in azienda, guide, articoli e meetup. Lo facciamo anche attraverso questo podcast in cui intervisto product leader che spaccano e che potranno darti tantissimi consigli utili per migliorare il tuo modo di costruire, lanciare e muovere le metriche del tuo prodotto. Oggi sono con Leah Tharin, che è Head of Product a Jua.ai ed è PLG Advisor B2B, ovvero Product Led Growth Advisor per aziende B2B. Leah è una delle maggiori esperte e consulenti in materia di Product Led Growth e Product Led Sales, che è quello di cui parleremo oggi. Inoltre Leah è stata a capo del team di prodotto di Small PDF, prodotto B2C con oltre 50 milioni di utenti attivi mensili, cresciuti di 3 milioni in soli 2 anni. Risultato che l'ha resa una delle più grandi piattaforme di gestione dei documenti al mondo. Leah parla di prodotto e si occupa di PLG and Sales su leahtarin.com e nel suo podcast fichissimo Product with Leah, che ti consiglio assolutamente di iniziare ad ascoltare se ancora non l'hai fatto. Con Leah oggi parliamo di cos'è il Product Led Sales e di come questo approccio stia di fatto rivoluzionando il modo di vendere prodotti e servizi. Grazie infatti all'analisi del comportamento dei propri utenti è possibile ottimizzare il processo di acquisizione. A conti fatti è come mettere insieme il Sales Led Growth e il Product Led Growth, prendendo il meglio di questi due mondi. Con Leah parliamo di tantissime cose in realtà. Parliamo di carriera, lei infatti ha lavorato per tantissimi anni come dipendente, adesso sta passando alla parte di Solopreneur. Facciamo un po' anche di indagine sulla sindrome dell'impostore e di come combatterla. Ci confrontiamo anche sulle differenze tra aziende europee e statunitensi e in generale Leah offre un sacco di spunti e suggerimenti utilissimi per te se vuoi essere un bravo PM o semplicemente se stai costruendo già oggi un prodotto digitale. Se ancora non l'hai fatto, ti chiedo di lasciarci una review a 5 stelle su Spotify o sulla piattaforma su cui ci stai ascoltando. Questo ci aiuterà ad impattare ancora più persone e a diffondere ancora più velocemente la cultura di prodotto in Italia, che poi è la nostra missione. Prima di cominciare ti ricordo che tra pochissimi giorni, il 6 ottobre, ci sarà la Product Heroes Conference, 2 giorni in cui accoglieremo e ci confronteremo in più di 1000 accogliendo aziende dalla Silicon Valley, dall'Europa e dall'Italia, per cui se ancora non l'hai fatto ti consiglio di acquistare il biglietto. Adesso non mi resta che augurarti buon ascolto e ricordarti che dopo i tempi duri vengono sempre tempi eroici. Ciao Leah and welcome to Product Heroes.
Good morning, Marco. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. As I was telling you, it's impossible for me to make the intros as you do in your podcast. So we will start straight away with your story. I'm very curious to understand what's your path and how did you manage to become first PM and then the path you are in right now.
Yeah, so I think my story is a little bit unusual and also common in the way that product people usually come from like 4 different areas and they never start off as product managers. This was exactly the same for me. So I started in 1999. So in the last millennia, I started as an API developer with C++, and I was really bad at it. And then I moved to UX research, which was a very lucky strike from where I was, because I was just, I'm not a good engineer, definitely not. And I learned from UX research and this thing that we called back then information architecture and jobs to be done later, and how to organize information, how to understand the motivations of people, and all of this stuff was highly relevant later on in my product career. But originally, I never knew anything about product management. I was just one of these filthy web designers. And web designers were people who did everything, like from the animated GIFs to coding on the website, the front end, everything, like graphics, all of it. We figured that, one person needs to do this, and then she needs to do everything. And I did that for about 10 years. I think I did the math a couple of months ago, and I think I must have done like between 500 to 1,000 customer interviews, like speaking to people in one-on-one interviews. Yeah, it was quite intense in that time. And I really love that. So I'm someone that enjoys one-on-one conversations, like going deeper, understanding why people are doing what they're doing. And what really frustrated me with time is that you start to uncover all these problems and you start to understand, at least in some parts, how the customers are interacting with you, because you can just not read everything out from Google Analytics, which was the predominant tracking platform that we used back then, if anything. And that's how I slowly slid into product management. Like I started to have a couple of jobs. Funny enough, one of my first product jobs was as a head of product. And I was underpaid. I was overtitled, is what I call it. And it was an interim position, and it was in a startup that was heavily overworked, very, very successful. And in 7 months, we went from like 20 people to, I don't know, 95, if I remember correct, when I left. And then the company got sold. So I had this compressed kind of thing in my life that was crazy, from the morning till the evening, on the weekends. And then it was over. And that was my first kind of real touch with product management, because I learned a lot about Scrum, OKRs, some financial stuff as well, funny enough. But this put me off. This was my very first experience, and I said, like, nobody can sustain this for years. And this is a problem that you sometimes have in product, in that you think that, like, if you have a specific experience with something, that everything is like this. So I figured that product management has to be done in this way. I thought that startups are done this way, and that put me off a little bit. So I wouldn't call it a break, but like then I went more into a corporate environment. So in Europe, the way that this works is that when you go to do product management in Europe, oftentimes there's a 60 or 50-50 chance that you land in an actual project manager's role. And that then frustrates you again, because you're just organizing tasks, which I'm really bad at. And the actual part of driving changes through, like talking to people, aligning stakeholders and so forth, that's kind of missing. And I think I had a couple of interesting gigs in the time between, but maybe what's really interesting to mention is that the real breakthrough was when I ended up with Small PDF, which is a document management platform. There's a big chance that if you're listening to this, that you know it. It's very, very big. We grew up to 50 million monthly active users, which was massive data stack to work in. And this is where I could start to apply everything that I knew from growth, from product, and so forth, and also saw really good leadership in a way that everything came together, like a startup that was different, leadership that was different, growth that was different, product that was different. Everything came together. And this really was the first time where I could do what I wanted. And that made me also successful. And this is really what put me here ultimately in the end, and I learned so much about how to run a company, how to scale a company. I mean, I was not the CEO or anything. That's not what I mean. But like, if you're in the middle of a story like this, that is so inspiring and so crazy, you see everything. And yeah, where did this end me up? It ended me up now as an independent full-time growth advisor. I do it very much from the product side. So I'm still a product person, I would consider myself, because there's usually two types of people who tend to do growth advising. They come either from product or they come from the more marketing side. And I tend to come more from the product side. So I talk a lot about product like growth, all of this stuff that I learned over the last, I would say, 24 years. Some of them more useful, some of them less useful. Went into this, and I built a career on it. And here I am. Yeah, that's what it is. This is how I ended up here.
So one thing that I think it's very interesting what you said about startups, that you were doing like everything and you were thinking that doing startup was exactly as you were doing. That is like a thought we all have. I mean, we are in Italy, we are in Europe. And when we talk about startups, we tend to imagine like someone who's working all day long, even weekend and nights. But why, in your opinion, there is this misconception of the startup world?
I think this has a couple of unhealthy connections to the realities as we think they should be. So, like for instance, we start to celebrate people when they work very long. Like if you go through a company, right, and somebody has been working really crazy on something, and then the CEO makes an announcement like, "Hey, I'm very proud of what we achieved here. You shouldn't work this long. Hey, but really good achievement." It's almost like you're saying something is black and then it's white, and or it's purple and it's blue. Like it's just like, so what do you mean now? Is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? Like, what do you mean? And this is something where leadership fails quite often, I think, in Europe. We do not really understand in many companies what it means to be collaborative, for instance. So a lot of the structures that we see from American companies where people collaborate in cross-functional teams. So you define a lot of the strategy, a lot of the product work from the team side, like from bottoms up. In Europe is oftentimes just like a kind of, you have to structure from the outside, but it's still the CEO and everybody else telling the product exactly what to do. So it's you have a very common sales led structure, or a salesperson hears something in a very important account meeting, and then this goes into the backlog, and then everybody has to kind of work on it. And this is problematic. It creates a lot of tension and a lot of problems. And the solution for it is actually that you start to create good goals that are very outcome driven, that are related to the customer, and that you stop rewarding only successes. What you should reward is whether someone did their work thorough and whether you actually learn something from experiments. And sure, we're pushing people to reach something. Of course, I'm not saying that, but there needs to be some kind of balance between, hey, we know that the majority of our experiments are failing, but we are measuring all of them and we learn from all of them. And that's the most important thing, rather than, oh, we're just going to celebrate everybody who probably made the best presentation about the 200,000 that they achieved for the company. And that's kind of like, that's definitely a big part of the problem.
Okay, a little bit deeper on that, because I see a lot of people struggling in this kind of like culture in which hard workers, let's say, are celebrated while outcome driven people are struggling. So let's say I'm in one of those corporate companies. What's your advice on how to change? Because it's a culture problem, we think, about trust, culture, setting goals, and then process. Okay. What's your advice? What can I do?
I think I'm taking this from how I would advise someone that asks me for mentoring advice. Like someone that is in a very particular situation, they call me and they ask like, "Hey, Leah, what would you do now?" Because I had this conversation dozens of times. And the usual advice that I give people is that you are probably and very often overestimating on what people see that you do in your work. That's the first thing. I'm going to address this in a second. And then the second thing is, you probably also do not understand well enough what is important for your bosses and their bosses. Right? So, like, if you're in a corporate environment, there chances are that you're on the ground floor, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with this, but like you have a boss, and then the person also has probably a boss or a leader. So, what do I mean with these two? Like, if we start with the latter one, product managers tend to have an extremely good knowledge of the market, right? So we talk a lot to customers. If you're being diligent about this, it's very hard to not understand your product really well as well, right? So like you have a very good knowledge of inherently what the customers want from your product. Why are you not using these skills to understand how your company works as an ecosystem? What is important for your boss? So I can tell you from experience, when I had my first team leading jobs, and this was nothing crazy, like 4 to 5 whatever. Do you know what your manager is being measured on? It's quite important. I'll gladly tell you what I was being measured on, or like what I'm being measured on as an executive. I can tell you that, right? So like, what is important to me? But most people never ask that. They never ask that. And maybe the manager also assumes that you should know that, but you also don't know, right? Because the manager doesn't know whether you know. Now, why is that important? Because that allows you to be very, very specific in prioritizing things and then say, like, okay, if this is the priority, then it can maybe let something else go bad. I had a very interesting case with someone else that was working on some internal resources for their company, and they felt like that their contribution was not recognized enough, right? Like they felt really down, and they said like, hey, I don't know, like I've been putting so much work into this and nobody's recognizing my work and so forth. And I was just thinking like, why did you spend so much time on a document that almost nobody reads? And they said like, yeah, but my boss told me to do this. And I said like, yeah, but like, did you ask them whether they just have to get it done, or do they need to have it done like perfectly and great and so forth, right? Because what we do is we apply our own standards to everything that we work on. And this is the first thing that you really have to change. You kind of have to understand that if you do not work 16 hours a day, because I could work 16 hours a day with the backlog that I have, then something has to either be done in a worse quality or you don't do it at all. So if you have a choice in letting something fall to the side, you have to do two things. First, you have to prioritize what's important. You can only prioritize what's important if you really know what's important for the unit leader or the person above you. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is you need to talk about it. Make sure that someone really realizes what you achieved for them. And I said achieved, not what you worked on, right? This is about working smart. And this is why I said also at the beginning, people overestimate what they think others see that you do. There's so many people who feel like, why am I not getting a promotion? Why am I not getting a promotion? And I always tell them the same thing. Yeah, why don't you? Why don't you ask why you're not getting a promotion? And then they go back and then they ask, like, so, I mean, you should not go to the boss and say, like, hey, why am I not getting a promotion? You can also phrase it a little bit different. You can say, like, hey, what is my path to a promotion? What do I need to do to get better? Because if they mention something that you have been doing already, then that's kind of your fault, right? You're not making it visible to the person above you that you did these things. And I feel like there's this imbalance between, let's say you are a manager of a team and you have 5 people. Every one of these people probably sees a lot from you every day. You're 100% present to them all the time. You know, like if there's something, yeah, I can go to Leah, I can go this and that. The other way around, I see maybe every individual team member 10, 20% of my time. Because it's just like, you know, like they're not giving a constantly team presentations, or like, you know, like they're not rustling up the team all the time. I just have one-on-ones and so forth. So there is an imbalance between what I am seeing from you and what you're seeing from me. But we're still pretending that you see me the way that I see you. And that is kind of the problem that is underlying all of this.
It just came to my mind. So thank you very much. Very clear explanation. That I was working with the UX designer team, and we needed to take a product decision. And so they ran, I didn't even remember, it was interviews or test or something. And they created this guy that was very academic. So he came straight from university. So I didn't understand anything about UX researcher, nothing. Because I was used to work in a startup and doing everything by myself. So he created a report for me. It was 125 pages. So I told him, okay, this guy was named Fabio. Is Fabio. Fabio, please, can you elaborate like a shorter report for the executive team? Because we don't even have the time to look at the document. It was, sure. Tell me how many pages. Guess how many pages was the shorter version?
I don't know, tell me.
70 pages. It was crazy. And this is exactly what you were saying. So this like different alignment on how people pretend or suppose other people are judging their work. So it's super important. And you said you have to act as a product manager. Who's your customer? What's their need? What's their goals?
It is funny because if you work in machine learning, you have to deal with a lot of academics. And if you work with academics, PhDs, and so forth, they probably have never worked in a product organization too. But that is not their fault, right? So exactly what you said is happening. So they wait for an instruction on doing something, like research, you have a goal, and then you kind of go on yourself for 4 weeks, and then you're doing something with it. And who can blame them? This is how they used to do things. So what you need to make sure as well for yourself, and this is something that I accuse product managers doing this way too often. Make sure that when you have a bigger thing that you want to launch, how do you launch a product? You can always launch it with a prototype. Nobody told you that when someone said that you need to finish a big piece of work of something else, like implementing a new system or I don't know what, like some internal resource again or whatever. Nobody said, don't come to me with a draft. Nobody said that ever. I'm very glad if you come to me and show me like a very rough outline, not like the entire document, but just like, hey, here's how I would approach it. Do you think this is in line with what you expect? And then I can say yes or no, but I'm not going to be mad. What I'm going to be mad about is when 3 weeks later, the 125-page document comes. You wasted your time, you wasted my time, and we don't have a tangible outcome. And this is the biggest resource waste that you can do, because this is also how you get into trouble, whether you deserve it or not. And this is where people feel unfairly treated quite often, because they did not align expectations. And the problem is, they think that I have my tasks that I gave you as much as in terms of an overview and control as you do. In tendency, people who are working on the operative ground have fewer tasks. This is not to diminish that somebody has not a bigger backlog. That's not what I mean. But you have a more focus, okay, this is priority 1, priority 2. As a head of product, this is not a competition about this, but I'm just trying to kind of illustrate. There are hundreds to 200 different priorities that I could focus on right now that are critical to the business, and nobody's telling me what to do. So I need to kind of figure out myself what's the most important. So why do you expect me to know and follow up constantly with you about this one task that I delegated that I personally set for myself? This is not important enough right now to occupy my kind of attention span, because you are probably a better expert on it anyways. Why wouldn't a designer design things? So you have to also have empathy in this kind of direction, because if I have to follow up 3 times for getting something, that's where people start to get in trouble. And it's very rarely the amount of the quality of the work or how they did it or whatever. If I start to follow up constantly, hey, where is this? Where is this? Where is this? Then there's a misalignment in expectations and deliveries.
I think I'm speaking about Italy. I think this is very rooted in our culture, that actually you cannot be wrong. At school, you cannot be wrong. You have to be pixel perfect on everything you do. And how do you do that? By asking your teacher at school if you're doing right. You do, okay, am I doing right? Am I doing right? So you have to do constantly this check and control, as you were saying. But we need to move forward, otherwise we stay 1 hour. I love it. So you recently switched to full-time consulting. That is a path that I'm seeing a lot right now. And I listened to the recent podcast with Elena Verna, in which you were talking about the solopreneur journey. And Elena was saying, okay, when you're a company, everyone is throwing things at you. So actually you de-specialize. So I got a part of this decision process. But what's your take? So why do you decide to switch to full-time consulting?
It's really funny. I just noticed that Elena's last name sounds very Italian. She could be Italian, Verna. It kind of makes sense, right? Hi, Elena, just in that case. Okay. So the decision process started probably a year ago, I would say, roughly, because I never really intended to go full-time, at least this quick. So about a year ago, I really started to pour everything that I have into my personal brand on LinkedIn. Everything started to blow up. I started to write guides and so forth. So in November 2022, I wrote this guide about product-led growth, which has now become, I think, at least the most read guide in the world about product-led growth. And that was the starting point where I started to gain notoriety, right? So like people started to get to know me and so forth. So I have to preface what I'm going to say now in that I'm one of the bigger ones, right? So like I'm one of the bigger consultants. And there is a problem with sometimes how specifically people on LinkedIn are portraying how easy it is to become a full-time anything, like a consultant or a full-time LinkedIn teacher, I don't know, whatever it is. There is this kind of period of time where you start to gain traction, and then it takes about 4 to 6 months for someone to start reading your material until they start to contact you. Hey, do you also offer paid advising, consulting, coaching, whatever it is? So this takes time, and this is hard, and it takes a lot of time also, like out of your day. So what I used to do is I started to work at Small PDF then still, but I also knew already that I kind of want to go because I wasn't growing at the position. So I started to write about what I work on because, as a PM, you create a lot of these documents every day. I started to coach people. I started to appear on podcasts. I started to put much more of my material out there. And I started to also get a lot of feedback and love back. I met Elena also, like that was about last year somewhere. And we've become good friends. And she also showed me a lot of how to structure this in a much better way, like how much to charge, how to I kind of like get everything done. And these are all tactical tips that you can read on, that you can learn on, like in these podcast episodes. But the main thing that happened to me at Jua.ai, where I'm head of product right now, is that the company started to pivot into a direction where product-led growth is not that important anymore. So it's going to become, one of these really high-level enterprise sales-led gigs, which is great because I also carried this pivot, right? So like I pivoted myself outside of the company. And then I sat down with my CEO and we kind of discussed, hey, does this make sense that I'm still here in 2 years in this particular role? And I said, probably not, because I'm not a trader. I'm not an energy trader. This is where the company's now going. And I feel like I have now to choose between product-led growth and enterprise high-level sales in a power trading area that just does not make any sense. So my personal brand and this did not match up anymore. And then we decided, hey, you know what? I have the liberty. I probably have enough people to make a living out of this. Why don't we just pull the plug now? I find a good successor in the next 3 months. And then we secure the funding, and then you have someone and a coherent leadership team for the next 2 years. Because this is also something that is quite important. You cannot leave a company as an executive in the middle. You can, but like you shouldn't in the middle of fundings, because otherwise what you have is you have a new head of product coming in, which is always a big business risk right before you are starting to raise funds, and that's never good. So this was kind of like the background behind this. And I was very, very scared when I made that decision, because I have this talent of feeling like I'm on the brink of bankruptcy or I'm going to take over the world within one day. That's just the business fluctuates quite a lot. But yeah, I've been at this now for quite some time, and it's a lot of fun too. So yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you. So I remember the first day in which I decided to go all in on the entrepreneur journey. I have this spreadsheet that actually I kept updating. I keep updating every single month. I was managing myself as a startup with my runway because of the family. It was
Yeah,
crazy scary.
of
Was
course.
crazy scary. But at the same time, was 1 month was okay. I'm gonna be a billionaire. The next month, I'm gonna be bankrupt. Okay, talking about product-led growth and product-led sales, where do we want to start from? Like product growth and then product-led sales. So you decide.
So just really quickly, what product-led growth is, it is about how do you generate trust with your customers in a different way. Why is this important? Because if you're doing this correct, then you're leveraging the biggest strength that you can have in today's markets, which is the recommendation of someone to someone else. Now, why is this important? When you start to have a product in a commoditized market, and commoditized means customers have choice to address the same problem with different solutions. So let's say you have a family and you want to get a new car. You have choice. You have a lot of choice. You can get a Fiat, you can get an Alfa Romeo, you can get a Ford, whatever it is. So what happens in these over commoditized markets is that it's not just the product that matters for you. It's not just like what you're getting out of the car. It's also how you select it, how the buying process is. How do you get to know the value of this particular car? Can you test drive it? So it starts to become extremely customer oriented. And that is essentially what product-led growth is, what we're talking about for tech and B2B, all the same. We give trials, we give freemiums, like we let people try before they buy. That is an oversimplification because product-led growth is very much about the art of this. How do you structure a trial and a self-serve motion in a way that is efficient, that works really well for the customers, but also for the business? And fundamentally, what we do, if you want to take the example of a car is traditionally a very sales-led business. You give someone $30,000 or whatever a small family car now costs, and then for this kind of money you get a car, but you have not really experienced the value of this car yet. Maybe you've test driven it, that's not what I mean, but there's a lot of risk for you in there. It's a big time commitment. You need to go to the government, you get the license plates, all of this, right? So there's a lot of money flowing, and it's not that easy to pull out of it anyways. You can still sell it, you can, but it's not the same as just saying oh, I don't want it anymore. And what we do in software is we started to also structure these paying processes different. So instead of just giving you 30,000 for a piece of software, we say, hey, why don't you just pay every month as you go, as much as you use it? And then you maybe pay me 30,000 over the next couple of years. That's essentially what product-led growth is. So we shift the entire risk for you from the buying process to me, the company, and we establish trust in any way that we can with you as fast as possible and as easy as possible for you. And it tends to be that you as a consumer do not want to talk to a salesperson. That's not universally true, but you do not want to talk to a person if you can make an independent buying decision yourself by just going into the car and just driving a little bit, right? So as much as we can take this away. So product-led sales is the approach to kind of connect the best from both worlds together. So we have sales-led on the one hand, where a salesperson is trying to show you the product and then you pay a lot of money. And then we have product-led growth, where you don't have a salesperson normally involved because, the individual price per person is just not worth it. And together, this gives you product-led sales. And the only difference, in a sense, is that we try to measure in product-led sales what a business customer is showing us that they do with the product to determine whether they are ready to buy or not. So instead of having 100 business customers getting into cars and driving around, what we make sure is that we measure very exact who is getting into the car. We still let you test drive, right? So we have a lot of B2B customers, but out of these hundreds, there's maybe 10 who are exhibiting a very different behavior. They're driving the car longer. They're maybe going into very specific information. They might invite other people into the car. Maybe the car is not a really good metaphor for this, but the point is we attach their behavior to what's happening. And then from there, we kind of attach scores. And if you go above a specific threshold, then you are a good target to reach out and also to close. And we still do not charge you the full price for the car. We charge you as little as possible. And the reason for this is twofold, and that's the entire story of product-led sales. First of all, we want you to have a good buying experience with us. We want you to have real trust with us. We're not tricking you into anything. We're not oversubscribing you with anything, because the reality also in business is if you as a business customer are buying software at a low price and you love it, there's a high likelihood that in the next 12 to 18 months, if you grow, that you're going to expand. So the usage starts to go up, and with me, the count also starts to expand. Because think about what happens if I'm selling you something that you don't use, right? So like I sell you 500 licenses because it's a big deal, but you have 50 customers, or 50 employees. The first day a CFO comes into the company and sees this license deal, says like, no, just quit it. Like, why do we even have the subscription? That's not a sustainable business model. I want you to be my customer for years or forever if I can, and not just because I talked you into something. And that's product-led sales. So this is fundamentally about how do we create customers' trust and how do we turn it into money. It's by honesty.
Okay, could you share a real-world example of product-led sales, like implemented?
So let's take small PDF. I think most people probably know this, or Figma or Canva. It doesn't really matter. So anything where you have a document that you're working on, and let's say that product is easy to use for an individual person, for a team, and for an entire company. And a very typical example would be Canva. Canva is very easy to use. It's a graphics program. You can go in there, you can paint around and all that kind of stuff. So what we would do if you have a B2B client, they're usually coming in and then they use the stuff. Maybe we cannot even identify them, but we're collecting the data, of course, like how much do they use the product and so forth. But if they start to open an admin account and they start to invite others to their account, then we kind of start to know, okay, this is a B2B client. Sometimes you also have flows where you start to identify them first with like, hey, enter your information, or like we're a B2B client or whatever. But anyways, once you have identified them, this is what we called an account, right? So an account has multiple users. And in these users, there's probably organized in teams. And these teams, they exert a specific behavior. So sometimes it can make sense to track whether someone in this account has looked at a very specific page on your website, because these pages are maybe only looked at by B2B businesses that are interested. So for instance, service level agreements, terms of services, some very specific pricing pages where you have combinations, or like what are the group discounts look like, and that kind of stuff. So with time, you start to figure out how much value is in which action, right? So like people who are doing this particular thing tend to also close with us later afterwards. So this is kind of like a correlation analysis that you're doing. And in this way, you collect points per account. And if you go above this threshold that you have to define, you have to always figure this out. So for instance, I could say like, hey, if Marco is inviting more than 10 people from his company to this, then we would consider him to be a product qualified account. This is called a PQA. And a product qualified account means you have qualified yourself over the behavior, over the account that you're willing to buy. And inside this product qualified account is a product qualified lead. And that is the person who has the buying decision. And if you're doing this clever, then you know who the account is, so like the entire mass of people, but also the person with the buying decision. And if you start to contact them, then you have a completely different conversation than you would have otherwise. And this is the beauty of it, right? So like this is what we're trying to do. So the result of this is that you can start to approach much more of your potential customers for less value, because your hit rate, so the amount of deals that you're closing per call, is much, much, much higher. And it's a much more positive experience for the buyer and the seller, because, hey, I don't mind if someone calls me from a product that I love.
That's right.
Let's talk about it, right? Like, let's talk about it. It's not like, oh, hey, I would like to talk about a product that you've never heard about. This is what we call product-led sales.
So a couple of notes on that. So basically, it's like scoring customer. You usually score customer outside your product. Let's say in the upper part of the funnel. With product, let's say you score customer inside, let's say, your product. And I think, but correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the most tricky parts is to find the right leading metrics in order to score customer. So you were saying product customer qualified, something like that. But you have to create index or like set of metrics that will enable you to have the right information. And I think, but I'm curious to understand what's the process. That is the one of the hardest part, like experimenting on the metrics, understand when the threshold is right or not.
This is funny because this is one of the easiest things to do for a normal product-led growth company, like someone that does this with a normal business, and one of the hardest things to do for an enterprise company. And I'll tell you why. So, what is a typical product-led growth company? Probably most startups that are coming up and are selling to B2C customers. So, a lot of people with very low subscriptions are probably product-led growth in some way, because you cannot afford to have sales. So you need to have a good product. You need to kind of, like you also have a demo and so forth. You might not do it perfect, but like you're probably doing it. So why is it easier for these companies to do product-led sales? Because the hardest part about product-led sales is that you're tracking user behavior. Now, chances are that if you have 5 to 10 million of revenue already yearly, that you're already doing this. What do I mean with this? So what I mean is, can you tell me at small PDF how many documents that I've processed? Yeah, probably. Yeah, right. Like we know this kind of number. You also know which kind of tools that I use, when I logged in and all that kind of stuff. So all of this information is already gathered. So what you have to do is you have to take your data scientist, if you have one, or someone in product that is really good about kind of data, to make a first draft and see, okay, we have all these customer signals. Let's see if this translates into something that works. And then you create a prototype, and then you have a pipeline. So you can say, okay, here's how we score these. Let's see what happens in the future to these accounts. So we take a group of 100 accounts, and then we have 20 of those that have this behavior that we assume is going to be good. We're already measuring it, right? Do they look at a specific page? We have the data already? Like, this is the great thing. And then you see what happens down the line, like a couple of months later, without changing anything. So you can kind of see whether you can predict someone's behavior, because that's what we're kind of trying to say here. It only works, of course, if you also have enough inbound and so forth. If you don't, then you just make some assumptions and you just try to do it. The problem for enterprise products is that they often do not even have a trial or a self-serve version. So that's the first hurdle. But let's say you do. There's a big worry from sales-led companies that if they sell their product with a public pricing page, like how cheap it is, that, oh my God, everybody's getting our product for $5. We cannot sell it anymore for 50,000. And while that worry is kind of true, that's the first hurdle that you have to take. So there's a sales component that you have to deal with, which is problematic. But the more important one, the more difficult one, is sales-led companies are really good in measuring everything about their acquisition. Where do people come from? How many MQLs do we have? Like marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads. How do they move through the funnel? How many calls do we have to take? And they ignore everything else. They do not measure what people are doing in their product. They may be measuring it, but they're not leveraging it in their organizations. And that's funny to me. It's not funny. It's good, because otherwise I would not have a career. So the very first thing that I have to make is okay, we cannot stop at acquisition. We just can't. We have to extend this entire thing. So what I do is I have a 5-step approach to this. There's a guide on my blog where I talk about this. But essentially what it is this. You take an inventory. What do we not measure today that we have to measure today, now? Because if you don't measure it, you cannot analyze it afterwards. It's just the first thing. Second thing is, what is success for our customers? In these companies, it's very often the case that they've never really sat down and think okay, how does someone move through our product? What is the first time they hear about it? That step they maybe have, because marketing is usually very strong in these companies. So what is the first time they heard about the product? And what is the setup moment? When were they ready to use the product? They've installed an app, or they have created an account. What is the aha moment? When did they use our product for the first time and experienced value? What is the eureka moment? When did they, for the first time, oh, that is interesting. I didn't know that you can do that. And when did it become a habit? So does someone have a habit that used your product 30 times over the last 30 days, or is it 6 months? You kind of need to think about this. And this is very individual for every product. But these two steps you could do without killing anyone, right? Like there's no pricing page, nothing. Like both of these things you can just do like this. And this is the very first step. And after you have done this, then you can think about, okay, maybe now we make a self-serve version of our product. Let's see what happens. We expose maybe a pricing page. We can also like make some experiments around it. And then you try to expose this data to sales. So sales also needs to be empowered through this. So you have 50 accounts. It needs to be easy for them to see, okay, I'm calling this particular person. Now I need to see what they did in the product and why, because this also helps them in the end to have a good conversation with their customers. And all of what I just described to you is a long process, because also surfacing data to sales is not like, oh, here's an SQL query. They don't know how to query databases. A salesperson is not a product person. They're doing sales. They're not a marketing person either. They're doing sales. That's why they're called salespeople. So creating reports and processes that allow you to use this in a good way means you're messing with a lot of stuff that this sales-led company has never dealt with, from the teams, from the processes, and from how you understand your customers. And that's a difficult thing, and I'm very glad for it, because this is how I built my career on it. So that's what I do.
So let's say I manage a sales-led company, and I'm coming to you to implement this process. How long usually does it take? How many months?
This is very different in like
roughly.
So this is
roughly.
but like it's very different for per company. But I can tell you that anything under 6 to 9 months to see something really tangible, like in revenue, is not realistic. It just isn't. And it depends obviously on the size of the organization, but you can also have some other quick wins. So usually what happens is that people come in, and then in the first kind of talk, they expect me to give them advice on their acquisition funnel. Hey, what do you think about our demo? What do you think about our pricing page? What do you think about this particular growth flow? And I can do that, but I'm too expensive for that, to be frankly, right? So but people anyways, they want to do it. So I give them feedback on this. And then the conversation shifts to, oh, okay, now we need to do this. Now we need to do that. Now we need to do this. So they think they have a product problem when they come to me, and then I talk to them, and then they understand they have a company problem. And company problems are nasty because it affects everyone, and that usually takes like 12 months, which is fine. Because if you do a good process like this, then even if all of it fails, you still end up with a better product. And that's a very cool thing. So yeah, I would say 12 months.
Are the sales team scared about this change? And how can you manage it?
Yeah, this was very funny. So I'm also teaching a course of product-led growth on Maven. So people come in there, they sign up, and then they learn about product-led growth. So one of my students was a VP product at a relatively cool, like a really cool startup in the UK, relatively not new, but like smallish. And so he was in this course, he loved it, and he went to a board meeting like the day after. He was like, guys, we're going to do product-led growth. He was super fired up, right? Like, we're going to do product-led growth. We're going to do product-led growth. Sales hears about it. The board hears about it. All they hear is, oh no, he drank the Kool-Aid. He just wants to do something cool. Now he's going to nuke our entire sales motion. And this is also typical, because product people tend to have sometimes a little bit, a strenuous relationship with sales, which is also common. I understand it. But salespeople are usually scared about this, and you need to be careful about it as well. But imagine someone comes to you and says, like, yeah, we're doing product-led growth. All they hear is, oh, sales is gone, product is here. And that's not what it is. And this is also another point why I say, like, I never, ever drive these initiatives through product. Everybody has to change, sales, marketing, and product. And that means you also have to change incentivization, for instance, right? So like, I'm going to change how you earn your money. And that is scary, because if you've never heard about this, I mean, that's why you need company buy-in. Yeah.
Okay, which are the three biggest mistakes you have made? I mean, not like disaster. We don't want to hear that, but the three.
You don't?
I mean,
Okay.
if you like, yeah, the three biggest learnings you've had during your career.
I would say from the entire career, I would say, like, let's take one from advising. I think one thing that you have to learn as an advisor, which would have helped me also before, is one that I already spoke about, and that is listening more to what your other part has to say in a call. And I mean, being less satisfied with what you think the problem is and just investigate a little bit more. So this goes to managers, this goes to the customers that you talk to, this goes to everyone that you interact with. Just shut your mouth and listen. Or ask clarifying questions. Don't assume that you are aligned when you're not. I think I've burned a lot of bridges because I thought that I have a solution, I ran with it and I completely bulldozed over people. I can give you a very specific example. I was in talks for cannot remember whether it was a VP product or head of or CPO. I cannot remember exactly, but I was in an application process that was for a job that I was super excited about. And this is already like a couple of years back. And they told me afterwards in the post that they rejected my application. And I asked, so why, right? And they said, like, because in my mind it was crazy, right? Like I had an assignment on site about 12 points on stuff that I had to write, and this was very, very time intense. And when I presented my findings, basically my homework on site that I did, they said that I did not listen to their instructions at all, and I did not address their concerns. All I did was I just rushed through my solutions just so I could bring it in time. And that hurt my ego quite a lot. Took me a couple of days to get over this, but it was absolutely on point. I did not listen. That was definitely one of the biggest mistakes. And I think in regards to the other two, I think I can just tell you the by far the biggest one in general is not to have a growth mindset. I had way too long this notion that I need to pretend that I know everything, that I was not able to just stand in front of people and say, like, I don't know, please teach me, because I wanted to appear competent when I actually wasn't. And that was extremely difficult for me, which is quite ironic because the moment you start to do it, you become just so much better in what you do. And it took me way too long to do this. And I wish I would have understood this in my 20s and rather than my 30s.
The third one?
I don't know, not starting on my personal brand 10 years ago, because that would have been a big one, I would say. And I mean, it's always easy to say in hindsight what the market is and what happens in this entire economy and so forth. But I think it goes a little bit into the other two. I just did not believe that I have a voice that is worth sharing. And I say this to people all the time as well. Do not make the mistake that I did. Just trust in yourself. You deserve where you are right now. You went through an entire recruitment process and you don't have to be perfect to be absolutely amazing. And I did not believe this for the longest time. I had a heavy, heavy imposter syndrome. And it was very debilitating because nobody's talking about it. So yeah, that's why I'm talking about it quite often.
Yeah, that's very important, the imposter syndrome. What do you think are the roots? Because what I see, correct me if I'm wrong, that usually people that don't understand anything, they don't have the, they don't know anything, they don't have any imposter syndrome. They talk. They read like blog posts, they watch a video, and they pretend that they are the expert. What I see is that people that actually have struggled a lot, like they've been in the trenches, they know like more than everyone, they have this huge imposter syndrome. Why?
The interesting thing is that I think almost everyone struggles with this in some kind of capacity. With age, it tends to reduce, right? You start to give less about what other people think. So there's this. But let's say, okay, so what causes it? I think it comes from this inherent drive that we have in ourselves to be loved, that we want to be respected, you spend a lot of time at work all day. We tend to be very inward focused, right? Like we tend to spend a lot of time on our image. Like this is why apps like Instagram and Facebook and whatever these social networks, all of them actually exist. And it's not to knock them. It's fine, right? Like I understand, especially as a woman. I mean, you're being judged a lot by how you look and what your appearance is. I know how that feels. It's not the thing. But it can take really unhealthy structures, specifically if you feel like you have to pretend because you're not a junior anymore. And there is this really weird stage in a lot of people's careers where maybe you get a promotion too early, or you just like, you're just not a junior anymore. And then you feel like, oh, now I need to know everything because your job title changed, right? And it's very easy to kind of get into this wheel of every time I'm being asked something, I just have an opinion about it, regardless whether I know or not, because now I'm not a junior anymore. And once you do this, you kind of you make the entire problem worse. Maybe you even score another promotion at some point. Maybe you don't even deserve it, but everybody's starting to fake it around you because they also start to mirror this behavior, whether you believe it or not. People start to imitate what you do, especially if you're starting to become a team lead. And this is, I think, I was a bad manager for a long time in my career because of this, because everybody came to me for advice and then I gave them some advice. And it's just not good, right? It's just not good. And I think an underlying problem is that we tend to love simple things in terms of who is faster, who can jump higher. We have competitions around who runs faster, who plays better chess than the other person, right? Like everything is a very binary system. You give someone a score and then they're better than the other person. You have a first, a second, and a third place. But in business, it doesn't work this way. Also, like as a human, we're just so much more than this. We don't have to always beat. Nobody celebrates the loser. And this is kind of like a little bit of a problem, right? Like it's like, only the people who made it into the gold medal, they are being remembered. And I feel like this is where this is coming from. We have this inherent drive to simple structures, and humans just aren't. And your career is not your title, it is not your salary, and it definitely is not the hours that you work on the job.
Very interesting. It reminds me one. By the way, if you check Leah's suggestion on books and links, we will link in the description. Is plenty of resources. And last time we were discussing with Leah about the book 4,000 Weeks. That is actually is one of, I think is my favorite one on personal growth. But it reminded me about another book, which I really enjoyed just the intro because I think is too much, is Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. And what I think is doing great in this book is to change completely the scenario in which you are not competing anymore. You are playing just your game with yourself, and it's about your growth, not growing compared to Marco or Leah, just growing as a professional and constantly detaching from the status. I think is the hardest part, detaching from status, from other people's judgment, from like, let's say, consumption, appearance. But this is another episode, I think, because it's like huge. So last two questions for you. If you have to leave just one single piece of advice to someone who's just getting started with product management, someone who wants to start to become a product manager, what would it be?
I think it is very difficult to give one particular advice on how to become a product manager because everybody's coming from different kind of disciplines. But I know a couple of things that do not work that other people tell you that work. So certifications, for instance, are usually a big waste of time. And I'm saying this not because they may not teach you something useful in terms of knowledge or whatever, but please, please, please do not do any of these courses for the certifications. That is not the right way to gain product knowledge. You can do product work without being a product manager 100%. When I see someone in my applications and they have founded a business, they started a website themselves, and they failed with it 1 or 2 years after, this is 10 times more valuable than any certification that you have ever done. There's a very good quote from my CEO that he used to say in that Juniors want to know what they should do to get to the next level. And the seniors, they kind of do the opposite. They find a problem that they want to solve, and then they learn the skills for it. And those are two fundamental different mindsets. The faster you can get out of this and just really try to figure out, I have no idea on how to do marketing or like paid marketing, but I need it for my website right now. How do I acquire this? Because then you start to become productive, right? So like you have this huge pressure behind you, like I need to kind of figure this out. How do I do paid marketing? Then you can go on a subreddit on marketing and you start to ask, like maybe you have someone in your network that you can ask, hey, can we sit down? Can we have a coffee? Can you teach me? This is the fundamental way of a product manager. There is no way that you are going to learn the 12 skills or whatever it is that you need to be the best product manager in the world. There is no one that is the best product manager in the world. But you have to learn how to find problems and then learn skills for them. And fundamentally, this is giving you a very good into product management, because then you need to surface it. So as I said, found your own business, even if it's just a website, learn from the problems and document your way. This is far more valuable than any certifications. There's studies on this, by the way, like that in the last year, certifications are 90% less likely to be a factor than before.
Totally agree with you.
Just in 1 year.
Totally agree. Even because our job is to teach people on product management, and what we say to candidates who ask us, okay, do I get a certificate? Can I use the certificate to access something? We say them, no. I mean, yeah, you can do it, but if you're coming for the certificate, I think this is you're wasting your money. There's a lot of money, like 2,000 euros. But if you need a certificate, you can go buy it online. I mean, for much less.
I think just to this point, really quickly, if you go to a school, also like the stuff that you guys do, people should spend so much time on the reviews, like what did other people say? Like, how did it transform their life, right? That is a good school.
Exactly.
That is exactly what you should do. So you should come for the material. You should use your time. You should ask questions. Try to form connections with people. Forget the certificate. You're here to learn, and that's just the greatest thing about the stuff that you guys and all these other services are actually offering right now is that you can learn with people that want to be there. In school, this was never the case. Why was I in school? Because I was young and some other kids were kind of like thrown into the same school, right? But nowadays, you can learn from people like you. You can learn from all of these amazing sites. I also have my courses, and everybody wants to be there. How amazing is that? You should use it, right?
It's great that you...
Yeah, it's an emotional topic.
No, but you're right. The point is that when I started, and probably when you started, I mean, if it wasn't for Marty Kagan and svpg.com, I was even lonelier. I was lonely. I didn't know anything, how to take product decision. I was asking to the wrong people, to the sales, to marketing, to CFO or CEO who pretend to know the hero of everything. I didn't understand anything. So I was managing very badly 30 engineers. I was driving them to wrong product decisions. And I was alone. Right now, beyond the school and the teaching, the great thing is what you're saying. There are hundreds of people who want to learn in the same moment, the same things. And they can do it together through communities or schools. So the last question, if you have to leave just one single advice to someone who wants to improve as a product manager, so who's already a product manager, let's say, with 5-7 years experience, and you want to do the next step?
That is an excellent question. I think two things that unlocked me. One of them was inside of product. So one of them is how to learn about strategy. This is quite difficult because there's not a good single one program that you take and then it kind of works. So you either have to do it in the company. There might be some schools that also offer something. But learning how to do proper product strategy, how to become strategic as a PM. If you haven't learned this by 5 to 7 years, this is probably the one blocker that keeps you from, if you want to become an executive at some point, right? So or a director or a group PM or whatever. That's one thing. The other thing is, I strongly believe that if you want to become really, really, really good at product, you need to understand marketing, you need to understand sales, and you need to understand company financials. If you do not understand how the company works around you that you're sitting in, how a funding round works, what is important for the board, what is important for the CEO, the C-level, and so forth, then you have handicapped yourself in the work that you do. A lot of the stuff that has advanced me in my career was I saw opportunities that were not in my garden, and I said, I'll take it. Here's the business case for it. Here's what I need in terms of resources. So this is quite crazy, right? Like if you think about it, like I'm coming already with a kind of a proposal, not an entire solution. I'm just saying like, look, this is the addressable market that I see. Here's who we need from the company to make this happen. Do you think this is good or not? And more often than not, you might actually see that someone is actually starting to listen and be like, hey, that's really cool. You came up with all of this. He's like, yeah. And then you can start to find, and then you can see whether it happens or not. And if you know what's important to your C-level, then you also already know whether they can consider it or not. Know your company.
I think the financial knowledge changed simply everything. Like it's a complete switch because you start to understand a lot of things. So thank you very much, Leah. It should be like 25 minutes. It was an hour. I could imagine. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon in Italy.
It was a big pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Gladly again.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Grazie per aver ascoltato questo episodio di Product Heroes. Se l'hai trovato utile, iscriviti su YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, insomma, dove ascolti i tuoi podcast normalmente, così non ti perderai neanche un episodio. Prima di andare via, vota con 5 stelline questo podcast o scrivi un commento, una recensione. Questo ci aiuterà a raggiungere sempre più persone e quindi aumentare la diffusione della cultura di prodotto in Italia, che poi è la nostra mission finale. Quindi il podcast è soltanto uno dei tanti modi che Product Heroes utilizza per spingere la cultura di prodotti. Trovi maggiori informazioni e tutte le attività che svolgiamo su productheroes.it e soprattutto non perderti l'appuntamento più importante che stiamo spingendo negli ultimi mesi, che è la Product Heroes Conference, che sarà a Milano il 6 ottobre 2023. Anche su questo trovi tutte le info su productheroes.it. Ciao e alla prossima!